Hello again. Removing a British government when no general election is scheduled for another 3.5 years sounds a pretty difficult task to undertake. Nevertheless, it can be done, although it is not quite as easy as was once the case. We have rather got into the habit these days of thinking that once a party has been elected with a good majority, then we are more or less stuck with them for the next 5 years. It was not always so, and I thought it might be interesting to run through one or two ways that Keir Starmer and his cronies might, at least in theory, be booted out of office before the end of this year, rather than everyone sitting quietly and waiting for June 2029 to come round, by which time the country will most likely have been completely trashed. It is, of course, not enough simply for Starmer himself to resign, because he will then be replaced by another member of the wretched Labour Party, somebody quite possibly worse than him. Yeah, there are such people. I think we remember when Boris Johnson resigned and was replaced by Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. I don't think many people would be wanting to see that happen again in a hurry. What many of us would like see is the turfing out of the Labour Party and its replacement by a party or coalition of broadly right-wing sympathies with a mandate to undertake a drastic change in our approach to such things as immigration in general and the granting of asylum to any footloose freeloaders from Africa and Asia who are able to find a dinghy ready to carry them across the English Channel. There are a number of ways that this might be done, but it's not a particularly optimistic outlook. Perhaps the easiest method would be to make the country ungovernable and conditions of life so disrupted and uncomfortable that the general public would welcome the chance to express their view of a useless administration at the ballot box. This was the means used to depose Edward Heath's government in February 1974. Heath won the general election in 1970 with a comfortable majority of 30. Not a landslide, of course, but certainly a good deal better than Harold Wilson managed to achieve in 1964 when he only had a majority of just 4 seats in Parliament. Heath was not obliged to hold an election until the summer of 1975, but he went to the country in February 1974 on the question of who rules, meaning who was the ultimate power in the land, the elected government or the trade unions. The country had practically ground to a halt due to a miners' strike and various other types of industrial action. There were power cuts, so that people had to keep oil lamps ready or a supply of candles, and many workers were reduced to a 3-day week because of the lack of electricity. In effect, the left-wing unions forced Heath and his government to resign, and Harold Wilson was voted back in. That, then, is one way of bringing down the government, by making everyday life so unbearable that people will choose any leader who is able to keep the lights on and prevent them from being hungry and cold. Of course, rioting and widespread civil disorder could achieve the same end, even more swiftly, but the chaos would have to be very widespread and pose a threat to the lives of the public. This is a gamble, of course, because a determined government might simply call out the military to suppress such a state of affairs. Not just that, but rioting is more likely to bring about the resignation of a prime minister rather than an entire government. The poll tax riots in London in 1990 brought about Margaret Thatcher's resignation, but the Conservatives remained in power for another 7 years. Losing a vote of confidence in the House of Commons obliges a government either to resign and call an election or to resign and see if any other party or coalition is able to form a government. This used to be pretty common in the 19th century. For example, in the 1850s, no fewer than 7 governments in the United Kingdom fell in this way, 2 of them in 1852 alone. The last time such a thing happened was in 1979 with James Callaghan's government. It could happen with the present Parliament, even with the majority which Starmer enjoys, but it would require many Labour MPs altruistically to sacrifice their profitable jobs and choose to give up 3.5 years of a very good salary. Most of them, of course, know that at the next general election they're likely to be out of a job, and so they have little incentive to vote against the government. They mostly wish to hang on for as long as humanly possible. Which brings us to the possible use of violence by a small, determined and well-armed body of men intending to overthrow the government, perhaps by a coup d'etat and seizure of power. I know that there are those who fantasize about such an event, but it isn't really a practical proposition for the simple reason of which I spoke a few weeks ago. Perhaps some of you will recollect that I quoted Chairman Mao Zedong, who said that political power grows from the barrel of a gun. This simply means that the real power in the land, the one able to enforce its authority upon everybody, is the one with the most guns. In this country, that means the army and police, who have at their disposal a fearsome array of weaponry. Even the police these days are routinely armed with carbines and automatic pistols. Ordinary people in Britain have systematically been stripped by law of the right to bear arms until the only kind of lethal weapon available to a law-abiding citizen is a 12-bore shotgun. At the time of the Chartists in the 1830s, there were groups of citizens who armed themselves in this way and tried to seize this or that town with a view to starting a revolution. But when a body of such revolutionists comes up against proper soldiers armed with the latest guns, the outcome tends to be short and bloody. I have summarised the options open to those who think it might be possible to get rid of this present government before the next election is due to be held in summer of 2029, and I'm very much afraid that the outlook is not sanguine. In fact, not to put too fine a point on it, it is absolutely hopeless.